morning and welcome to the Modise Network. Coming up, Professor Barney Pityana remembers Steve Biko and unpacks his teachings and influence. Later on, social media platforms have taken the world by storm and have created business opportunities. Thabo and Shaw Kamunga explain how we can use social media for good. The life of Stephen Bantu Biko was short, but his ideas continue to live 41 years after his death. Biko was killed by the Apartheid police in 1977 after a decade of being a voice that shook up young black South Africans from 1967. He was 31 when he was buried, but was already an international spokesperson against the evils of racial oppression. His ideas taught many young people about the pride of their heritage and the dignity of their humanity. There's a lot to say about Steve Biko, but there's even more to say about his colleagues and friends and the spirit and ideas of their time. With no resources and national infrastructure, they posed a formidable foe to the apartheid regime and indeed shaped the outlook and courage of the 60s and 70s generation. One of Biko's closest friends is Professor Barney Pityana, himself a formidable foe, a lawyer, a preacher, teacher and leader who joins me on the network. He's the former Vice Chancellor of UNISA and Program Advisor to the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. And I'm inviting you to share your thoughts with us on Twitter using the hashtag the Modise Network. And Prof, pleasure to catch up with you and good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Right, and Steve Biko, a close friend of yours for a long time. We'll talk about your early days with him. But let me start where we are now, that even those who were born after Biko had died somehow are looking for a connection of sorts with him. And those who grew up during his time still abide by some of the beliefs and teachings that he promoted, together with you and many others, of course, that is the way to go. Now, just explain to me, what is it that makes those views, those philosophies, sustainable up to this time and even relevant these days?
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for that question. You know, Steve remains a hero to all of us, of the 70s generation in particular. But even more, I think, the more I go around universities and everywhere, I find this thirst, this hunger for Steve Biko and for Black Consciousness and what he stood for. The fundamental reason for that isn't only that he died in the fashion that he did, it was brutal, heroic tragedy, but in the manner in which so many young people in our time identify with him in terms of age, because I tell them most of the time that almost all of what they see written by Steve would have been written while he was an undergraduate student. And that's hard to understand. And he was an undergraduate medical student. He was not a philosophy, English literature, sociology, none of those things. He was an undergraduate medical student. But he was learned beyond measure and beyond his years and beyond his academic status at that time. So that is in itself a very exciting thing for young people today, because it tells them about the possibilities that they can become as well. The second reason is that we live in a generation in our country which really and truly just doesn't care for young people. Young ideas, young thoughts, the inspiration of young people, the excitement of young people. We live in a society these days that really values age. And I mean, you look around, most of the exemplars that we have are much older people. It's very rare that you find any younger people. So Steve Biko represents a rarity in terms of our country, even today. That here was a young person in very difficult circumstances that are no better than most of the young black people in our time.
But you know, Prof, I was thinking about this in preparation for our conversation, and I go back to that time where there was no technology and the media was not freely available, limited number of newspapers. And then there was a time when South African, the black community was downcast, for some of us much younger than you. And we were wondering why it seemed like people have given up the fight and we're accepting their condition. And then there was this new way of thinking that was emerging, that was encouraging us to have a consciousness about. That's why I said it at the beginning of the show, that your heritage counts for something, and that you've got dignity and you must walk tall and be proud of who you are. And then it resonated with so many of us without necessarily having to attend any rally or meeting where this was said, right? It built the consciousness, so to speak. And I'll tell you a story later in the interview about what transpired as a result thereof. But tell me about this consciousness. What are the elements of it and why is it relevant up to now? I mean, the content of the ideology, philosophy or outlook.
I think the first thing, I think the late Dr. Untitled Chapter put it best when he said, black consciousness was an idea whose time had come. Nothing was going to change it, nothing was going to stop. It was an idea not because it was an anti-apartheid idea. It was an idea, first and foremost, it was an idea by and about black people and their humanity and where they were going. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it was a new idea. It wasn't anything like what we've come to know in the African National Congress, not even in the Pan-African Congress, but there was a kind of new thinking that was exciting to young people because it combined both philosophy, ideas and thinking, but also activism, if you like, on the streets, at home, at the university, but also using your hands, the development projects that people had, and writing and writing and writing. So you're right, it was at a time when social media was not there, but in fact the network of universities and young people, a resource that had not been tapped up to that stage. I don't know that if the National Party realized what they were doing when they established a network of black universities in this country.
But still, the universities were few, there was no television, and the radio stations that were there were not reporting on what was going on with yourselves and people like Steve Biko. Yet, across the nation, many more young people were being exposed to this kind of thinking and embracing it and owning it, without necessarily having, as I said, having to attend a meeting to understand what it was all about.
That's the genius of it, is that it started at the universities, but actually it went out from the universities. It materialized the network of universities which went right across tribe, language, what have you. And that is the network that really became the source of revolution in black communities.
Now, your friendship with Steve Biko and others goes back to your primary school days?
No, secondary school. Secondary school. Yeah. We were together in Form 4.
Form 4, right?
At Lovedale.
Yes. And then, but already from that time, you were, if you will, generating ideas of how the black community should be conscientized. I'm very curious to know, over a period of time, how you were distilling your thoughts and then producing a new way of thinking that you could promote, whether directly or indirectly, through those networks at universities.
I think Steve and I probably shared one experience. One, at the social class level, we were township sort of guys, and single parents. In his case, his mother was a widow with larger families around them. And both of us went, in our case, went to Lovedale, which was in fact those days quite an elite school, a mission school. But in his case, I had been there for the junior certificate, and he came in Form 4 from Forbes Grant Secondary School. But we were expelled with others within 9 months, so we didn't finish the year. Now he went to Marion Hill in Natal, and I went to Newell High School in New Brighton. And then we met again when we were university students. I went to Fort Hare, he went to medical school. It is actually then that these ideas began to come through, partly through conversations at the Anglican Students Federation, University Christian Movement, National Catholic Students Federation, University Christian Movement. All of those places were, even at the National Union of South African Students, for those who participated in those. Now, these conversations happened for the one main reason, that it became quite clear that these platforms, as they then were not ultimately going to be the platforms that express the aspirations of black people in the places and spaces where we live together. That's how these ideas came about.
Well, the story I said I will tell you later on in the interview is that, you know, picking up stories about yourselves here and there made me want to go to Forte at some point, which I ended up going to.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, following more or less the same trip as you did, spending a short time, then being kicked out of the university. I said I shouldn't have listened or been inspired by the stories of these people from Lovedale as well as Forte University. Look at me now. And that's what happened as a result.
Yeah.
But one thing for sure, the whole point was to go and learn and to understand what the story of black people and this whole black consciousness thing was all about. And we'll unpack it a bit further, as well as get an understanding from Professor Barney Pityana on the state of South Africa today and what we need to do to move ahead. We'll continue our conversation in a short while.